Welcome to Fleet News Group podcast. I'm Caroline Fall, and today we have Kirsten Corson, Chair of New Zealand's Drive Electric, an organisation comprised of member businesses such as energy companies, OEMs and individuals championing the transition to electric vehicles in the country. We're going to catch up on what's happening with the uptake of electric mobility there. Welcome, Kirsten.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me, Caroline.
We last spoke a couple of years ago in 2022 when you were running Zilch, a public car sharing and fleet services group that you co-founded. A lot's changed for you since then. Zilch has been acquired by the fleet financing and advisory group Carbon, but you've retained a role with them, I understand.
Yes, I am. Yes.
And as well, you've taken up the post of Chair of Drive Electric earlier this year. So I just want you to briefly tell us about Zilch and why it was a good fit for Carbon and what your new role with Carbon is.
Sure. Carbon's a fabulous New Zealand business that combines flexible fleet finance and advisory. And it was a great marriage with Zilch because, in essence, they've bought our technology. So, that technology gives corporates the ability to share their vehicles. So an example of that, so listeners can understand, ASB, which is like CBA in Australia, that's one of the customers. And working with Carbon Group, they're able to electrify their fleet, but optimise their fleet, and then also allow, if they wish, staff to take those cars home privately, and the business earns revenue from that. So it's a way that you can decarbonise your fleet in a really smart way where it's cost neutral or you're making a savings as well. So that's the Carbon offering.
And what's your role with the group now?
I'm their ambassador, so I help them out on a part-time basis just to support them as they transition the Zilch business into the Carbon business. So that keeps me out of trouble.
It's funny, I was reading over the script from our last interview, and what struck me was how the whole novelty of an electric vehicle back then, and only 2 years ago, seems to have evaporated here. So things have changed so much in just a couple of years in Australia, with ownership of EVs soaring and experience with them through test drive days, making drivers so much more comfortable with them. And of course, car sharing and fleet pools with EVs, which you do through Zilch and Carbon, have been providing also increasing familiarity. And I was just wondering, is it the same in New Zealand today, that the novelty seems to have given way to acceptance?
Yes, you're absolutely right, Caroline, and hallelujah for that. So New Zealand, we saw significant EV uptake. So to give you an example, last year 27% of new car sales in New Zealand were electric. And
wow.
So that's a massive increase. So we had a lot of what we call demand-side policy, so incentives in place, and similar to what Australia has got now, and that made a massive difference. But unfortunately, it has been a bit of a tale of two halves. We've had a change of government, and we have really seen EV sales slow down in New Zealand.
Just goes to prove how important sort of government policies are, and let's talk about that a bit later. But I just wanted to acknowledge that you've got a big B2B event coming up next month, October, in New Zealand, the 2024 New Zealand Electric Mobility Summit. And I note that you'll be giving a talk there on global trends in EVs. So I was just wondering if you could give us a little preview of that presentation.
Yeah, no problem at all. And look, in the presentation, I was going to talk about what a stellar job the Aussies are doing, because you are, the federal and state incentives you've got in place just some of the policy changes around the building code is really impressive. So look, I just wanted to acknowledge and salute the fabulous work that's been done in Australia, no doubt by a lot of people listening, and the EV Council and politicians, and it's great to see that growth in the Australian market. So, I know Carbon's eyeing up going into Australia because of that significant growth. So, a big congratulations to you Aussies listening. I guess one of the reasons I wanted to talk at the summit about just a global view, because the New Zealand market, it's been a massive difference this year. So we're sitting around 10% of new car sales are electric now, where last year, they were 27%. So you can see that is a big difference, unfortunately. So I just want Kiwis to have confidence that the market is going to come back. Whilst we've seen a loss, incentives have been removed. We've seen, in essence, a penalty for a plaque with road user charges. EVs are now paying the same level as diesel vehicles. And we've also seen our clean car standards weakened. So that has all had a massive impact on the New Zealand market. And I guess the heartening thing is, if we look globally and you look at the International Energy Agency, they're forecasting, 17 million EVs will be going on the road this year. We're seeing China sitting at around 35% of new car sales. We're seeing America sitting at 11%, and they're having significant growth. And we're seeing Europe sitting around 25% of new car sales. So, that is exciting to see growth coming in those markets. I guess one of the other aspects of note is the emergence of the Chinese OEMs. And you're seeing it also in Australia. The likes of BYD is a great example. A battery manufacturer that is now producing electric vehicles, and they are having spectacular success globally and also in the New Zealand market. And it's wonderful to see more growth in different types of OEMs coming into our markets as well, which is exciting.
Yeah, so many things that I could sort of pick your brain about there. But, one thing I was very curious about is that introduction of the road user charge that had previously been waived to stimulate uptake. The fact that it's no longer there, and I think it was around March this year that was introduced onto EVs. Obviously from what you've said, you've seen a big dive in EVs as a proportion of new car sales, but what's the mood like? How has that change rolled out?
Look, that change was really disappointing because for once in New Zealand we've got several industry groups similar to Australia, and it was the first time that 6 industry groups had come together, collaborated, and approached the government and said, we've got no problem with road user charges coming on EVs, but we want it to be fair and equitable. And here are some ideas around price points you could look at. There also was a select committee, which Drive Electric presented on and did a joint presentation on as well. And I guess the disappointing thing was it's the first time that industry had ever come together and were united on a point, and the government chose not to listen to us and to put EVs at the same level as diesels. Yeah. So it's had a massive impact for New Zealand.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to hear it, and but I think it's something that we should expect to occur in many jurisdictions in future years. Hopefully later rather than sooner. But just another thing about New Zealand that might be interesting to point out, in Australia and globally, a rule of thumb is that transport contributes about 20% of carbon emissions. In Australia, I think transport's number 3. But do you know what the stat is for New Zealand? And as you'll have more hydro and renewable energy, is transport the biggest emitter in New Zealand?
Well, no, our farming practices are the biggest emitter, but we sit at 18% of our national emissions come from transport, and if you're a business in New Zealand, it sits around 35 to 40%, around that figure. And from a New Zealand perspective, transport plays a really important part because it's actually that one emission profile that we can change. It's very hard for us to change our farming practices quickly and in time to meet our Paris Agreement targets. So transport is the easy win, and the commentators talk about if we can't manage to hit our transport targets, there is no way we've got any chance of meeting our Paris Agreement targets. So the previous emission reduction plan was talking about 30% of the fleet being EV by 2035, and currently we're not on track for that. And our Treasury are forecasting that in 2030 we would be looking to pay, New Zealand would be looking to pay around $20 billion in international offsets. So that means New Zealand would be paying to plant trees in third world countries because we haven't got it together.
Oh dear. Yeah, there's definitely going to be a watch this space then. Be interesting to see the politics there. But look, I love your passion for sustainability, and since we're here, and I also love to promote circular economy and principles like sharing, reuse, repurpose, can I just ask you to give your personal pitch for why you think it's so important for not only individuals but also for fleets and businesses to be more thoughtful and mindful on how they use resources?
Oh, that's a great question, Caroline. And it's a really important one, and often I see businesses patting themselves on the back about getting EVs into their fleet, which is great. A big piece, though, that we need to think about is that everything has a carbon footprint. And if you're running a fleet, or even if you're a four-car family at home, the question is, how do we optimise our fleet? And if you think the average car in New Zealand and Australia is used less than 5% of the time, so we have a lot of capital invested into depreciating assets that are poorly utilised, which isn't actually that smart. And I know Kiwis and Aussies, we all love our cars, but the question for us is, do we really need to order that car? And look, I would love to see New Zealand businesses from our public sector and even our publicly listed private sector corporates have to report on what their fleet utilisation is, because over a 10-hour working day or over 24 hours, because really that's a measure of success as well as electrification. So I think, if that could be a takeaway for all of you, electric vehicles are amazing and they offer so many environmental benefits, but you have to optimise and utilise an asset well to really get that return on investment from an environmental, financial and also a social. So I know that's something that Carbon is really going to be focusing on, is that stewardship, and how can we not just think about putting a car into a business for 3 years, but how do we think we could put it into a corporate, let it depreciate, then put it into a SME, then put it into a charity, then put it into a social housing. So instead of having a 3-year vision for a vehicle, but having that longer view, longer lens view on a vehicle, I think is really important.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I haven't never heard of anybody taking that view before on how a vehicle travels through its entire life and cycle.
Yeah. I think another exciting thing I'll just add in there, thinking from a circular lens, with electric vehicles. And I know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and is being done by the automotive industry to make the vehicles more circular. But for me, I think an exciting thing is the batteries and the minerals in the batteries. So looking at by 2035, mineral mining for the automotive sector, it peaks and then it declines, because we will see and we're seeing it already in the likes of Northvolt in Europe, repurposing the minerals out of batteries and giving them a second life in another battery. And I think that's a really neat circular story and something to remember with electric vehicles as well. It's really exciting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I understand something like 99% of the minerals in a battery can be completely reused.
Yes, yeah.
Have a second life, third life, fourth life. Just talking about policies, like we've already talked about the road user charge being introduced, but what about things like regulations for at-home charging? Have there been any significant changes to make it easier to set up things like outdoor charging at home, or is this something that still needs a lot of work?
It's still something that needs a lot of work. And look, if we look at Australia, you guys are hitting it out of the park with some changes you've made to your building code for apartments. New Zealand, we've got a lot of work to do in that space. If we look at like the UK market, I think is a great one, where new residential builds, you have to provision for charging infrastructure. 20% of new commercial builds have to provision for charging infrastructure, and local government have the ability to increase that further. New Zealand haven't got any of those policies yet. We've written to the Minister. We'd be keen to engage with the Minister on it. We just haven't seen a great appetite at the moment to engage on those levels. But they're pieces of the jigsaw puzzle we need to get right, because otherwise it's going to cost us twice as much to do it retrospectively. So, you know, those aspects, you're right, Caroline, are just so important. However, New Zealand is really lagging behind.
Finally, let's just talk about Drive Electric, and just be curious to know what some of the key planks of your strategy, you know, for the next year. What are you hoping to bring about over the next year? I guess it's just lobby the government.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if the politicians have got earmuffs on. However, yeah, there's three things that we focus on. One is that lobbying and advocacy work. The second piece is education, and we're running a winter learning series at the moment. I'm happy to give you the links that you could share. We've had some amazing speakers like Jim Lennon, who's a UK battery mineral mining expert, Dr. Ewan McTurk from Scotland, who is an electrochemist, battery expert. Some really great speakers like that helping to myth bust in New Zealand. So that education piece is exceptionally important. And the third part is networking our members and connecting them up so we can move quicker. So a great example of that, we've got IKEA, the Australian arm of IKEA is coming into New Zealand, so they've joined as a member, and we're looking to connect them up with different parts of the ecosystem to make it easier for them. So that piece is really important. And the other change with Drive Electric in New Zealand is that we've primarily been focusing on that light fleet. However, we're getting requests from the New Zealand market to step more into commercial and heavy vehicles as well, which we will do, because that common piece of charging infrastructure is critically important. So this week we ran a webinar on megawatt charging, and we'll be running more events like that, just trying to share the knowledge from the light fleet learning into that commercial and heavy.
Thanks for your time today, Kirsten, and all the best for the upcoming Electric Mobility Summit on October 16 and beyond.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Caroline, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. And I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts. Thank you very much.
Oh, and send those links that you mentioned. They sound really good to have.
No problem at all.
You've been listening to Fleet Auto News podcast. It was edited and produced by Isabella Fiorentino. The original theme music for this podcast was created by Isabella Fiorentino. You can follow us on Spotify. Just search for Fleet Auto News. We're also on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Our website is fleetautonews.com, where you can get all our stories, videos and podcasts. Until next time, drive safely and take care.